Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Got Powerful Harem with Hinata Anko Kurenai and Hana, Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Hinata watched from behind a tree, as Naruto walked out of the exam room. She had been waiting there to see if he had passed. But the look on his face as he walked out told her the answer. He had failed. It meant that he wouldn't be on any team. And that meant this was probably the last time she would have the chance to tell him. Except, he just looked so down. She thought maybe it would cheer him up to be liked, but what if he didn't accept her feelings? What if he thought she was just pitying him? Besides, the Hyūga knew that Naruto liked Sakura. He was constantly asking her out. Though, Hinata knew Naruto would never give up, and if she wanted him to like her, then she couldn't either. She just didn't know if it would end up as another failure. Then, in what to a normal person would seem like the blink of an eye, Naruto was gone. However, for a ninja and more so for a Hyūga, sight was different. Hinata was able to see that he was running, and so fast, it seemed her eyes had trouble seeing him run as well. It looked like he was headed to the training grounds. She thought for a moment. Even though he had failed, he was still going to train. He was always so strong like that. If he could fail and get back at it, then so could she. And even if she failed to tell him now, she could at least tell somebody her feelings for Naruto. She would wait until the next time she saw him, and then she would confess. 0000. Azuma was just about to get off duty at the gate. His replacement was late, and he was dozing off a bit. Therefore, to stay awake, he leaned the chair back and balanced on it. He wasn't sure if he had really seen it or started to doze again, but an orange flash of light seemed to whip by. He was so shocked that he lost his balance and fell backwards, landing with a large thud. 0000. Naruto ran through the forest, away from the teachers, away from his classmates, away from the looks and glares and the laughter that would come with them, out of the village. He couldn't stand to be there anymore. He wouldn't just sit there like the last two times and feel the gloating of the villagers as they laughed at him. After going a considerable distance he stopped, he sat down on the ground and just cried. How could he fail it again? He just couldn't stand it. It was like fate itself thought he should fail. He tried so hard, but he couldn't make any clones. Why? If he was just going to fail again, then why bother? It hurt knowing that the others would get to go on and become genin, but he would have to take the class over. He'd be a year older than all the other students. Raising his fist he slammed it against the trunk of a nearby tree. The punch left a hole in the bark, and tore his knuckles open. He was angry, mostly at himself. What had he missed? He must not understand the jutsu, he just needed to make it work this time. Forming the seal he tried to make a clone, and each time it failed he punched the tree as his anger slowly turned to despair. 0000. There were 5 of them in the office that night. 3 were jonin, ready to take on students, the Sandame's own son among them. Another one was the Hokage, whose crystal ball gave the images of various genin to be. Well, I'm afraid one of you will only be getting 2 students. Kakashi, the masked jonin, raised his hand. I think I'd like to be the one. I could say I'm spending more time training the Uchiha, that way. The council had already gotten on his case about his lax attitude concerning the boy's training. The others simply shrugged as they had made their picks known. Very well, Kakashi-kun, you will take the Uchiha and Miss Haruno. Lord Hokage, it's bad. One of the Hokage's Chunin runners burst into the office. Somebody has stolen the scroll of forbidden seals. The suspect is unknown, but our pursuing shinobi have reported that Naruto was seen in the area. Even now, nobody can find him. Gather the Jonin, this is more than just a prank, we must find Naruto at once. The Hokage shouted. This was bad, he couldn't get Naruto out of this one. How had Naruto even found out about the scroll anyway? 00000. As he leapt through the forest, Mizuki fumed. Naruto had been nowhere to be found. His plan had almost failed because that little brat had disappeared. When he found out that the Chunin on duty had thought he saw an orange blur leave the village, Mizuki was saved. Naruto left the village. He would have no alibi and Mizuki could blame it on him anyway. At least that was what he thought until the Inuzuka bitch caught him. It wouldn't matter though, he didn't need to go back now. As the traitorous thief passed over a clearing he spotted something. Well, thank my luck, Mizuki spoke out. Just who I was looking for. Naruto turned towards his sensei's voice just in time for the giant shuriken to catch him in the back. Mizuki grinned to himself as he dropped down to the body to retrieve his blade. But Naruto wasn't dead. He even started to get back up. So he quickly ran up and snapped the brat's neck. The little brat may have survived that too if the shuriken wasn't enough, Mizuki realized. The little bastard must be drawing on the fox to stay alive. So picking up Naruto's hands, with a crunch as he crushed the bones in the brat's fingers, the man put a foot on the kid's back and popped the tiny shoulders. At that angle the shoulder sockets shattered. Then he pressed even more and snapped the boy's spine too. He yanked his giant shuriken out of the demon's back and bent down to slit his throat as well. That done, the Chunin stowed his tools of death and leapt back into the trees, knowing that for this action, he would be praised by most of the village, even after the crime of stealing the scroll. 00000. Hana Inuzuka and the triplets were leading the search. She had been the first one to spot Naruto as he left the Hokage tower, but the brat was fast, she just couldn't keep up. So she summoned some help and began tracking him. Finally the scent was good. All three of her hounds began moving in for the kill. They found him. But he had already been taken down. Her Ninken whined. Turning to the Anbu, the Inuzuka relayed their message. This isn't the prey. What? One of the Anbu who had joined her pursuit asked. But Inuzuka-san, we all saw him. It was Naruto carrying the scroll. And here he is. This isn't the prey, she repeated, more firmly this time. His scent is different, and he's been here for hours. What should we do about it? One of them asked. We better bring him to the hospital, he's badly injured. She replied. It would be a better decision to just leave him for dead, get rid of it. The Anbu who had spoken gave a grunt and toppled forward. When he wakes, tell him he has an appointment with Ibiki-san. Behind the fallen Anbu, the man who had knocked him unconscious adjusted his shaded glasses, then stepped over the body and bent down to examine Naruto. All of Naruto's fingers were broken, as well as his neck, shoulders and spinal cord. There was also a large wound on his back, obviously made by an Oma shuriken. After a moment he picked the boy up and disappeared in a puff of smoke. 00000. When Naruto woke up, he was back in his personal room at the hospital. It was in a wing all by itself, with security and no one for him to bother. After a little more sleep he was woken up again, this time by the Hokage coming in. Hey Gramps, what happened to me this time? That he could ask such a question and so nonchalantly, the Sandame's heart ached. Naruto-chan, how are you feeling today? The boy looked at his hands in casts and tried to turn his neck, then huffed at the incapability. How long before these are healed? I need to train. If I can't get that clone jutsu down I'll never pass. The aged shinobi swallowed his pity for the boy. Naruto, about that, I think the academy has given all it's got to offer. Wait, thought the desperate child, Did he mean what it sounded like? Oh no. Why? He tried. Why would they kick him out? I think it would be best if we reassigned you to an Indiva. No, Gramps. Give me another chance, the young boy pleaded. I can make Genin this time, I'm sure of it. Don't drop me out of the program, please. Seeing Naruto so desperate, the elder couldn't bring himself to refuse. Very well, however, I will be assigning a private tutor to help you study. 00000. In the council chambers, the civilians were anticipating something they had wanted for 12 years, and the Jonin, well, they didn't quite believe these charges could be true. Several had already confirmed them to be false. But the few council members who had actually seen the boy being chased and had been the ones that told the rest of them, were still adamant about it. When the alarms were called, it had been the one they'd seen. As they waited for the Hokage to arrive, a procession of Anbu and a very badly beaten Chunin entered. Or rather, the Chunin was dragged in. When this happened, the civilians exploded in uproar. This was going to be the sentencing of the demon. Why was a Chunin brought in? Settle down. The Hokage had arrived. We are here today to sentence Chunin Mizuki for the crime of treason. But it was the Uzumaki kid who stole the scroll. Glaring at the one Jonin who hadn't figured it out already, Inuzuka soon growled. Do you honestly think a kid who can't even pass the Genin exam could steal such an important document? The Inuzuka matriarch continued, my daughter herself confirmed this man to be the criminal. Hearing this, all of the Jonin and most of the civilians voiced their agreement. The Chunin must have done an exceptional henge of the demon. While it would have been difficult to fool those he had, there was no way it could have stolen the scroll. 00000. Naruto was let out of the hospital almost an hour after noon. The blonde was broken, and not just in body. He had been hurt many times, but he didn't even know what happened this time. From the casts, he could guess. They hated him, that was why he failed. He knew that the clone jutsu wasn't required for all graduates. During the last year there was a boy who had graduated without any of the Academy 3. He thought could deal with it, he always had. This time though, even the Hokage, the old man, who had been there for him always, had given up on him. He was ready to remove him from the academy. As the bandaged boy walked home, he barely noticed anyone in the streets, until he saw the Uchiha. The genius was obviously heading out from the academy, maybe their lunch was late. The Uchiha grinned and asked Naruto if the tradition of failures staying at home had changed. Behind Sasuke, Sakura had just turned a corner several blocks away. Naruto thought as his depression lifted slightly, this is my final chance to see what she thinks of me. 00000. Kiba, Shino, and Hinata were eating in a restaurant getting to know each other better. It mainly consisted of Kiba asking the other two irrelevant questions. Shino answered most questions silently, but then, Kiba had the habit of asking questions that required verbal answers. So over this meal, he was speaking to two of his classmates more than he had spoken to the total of them for the entire past month. Kiba was rather energetic and finally he mentioned something very relevant in his bragging. My sister was the one who finally caught the thief. He exclaimed. That guy was sure he had escaped but my sister's nose was able to track his scent in minutes. The declaration sounded as if it was meant to boost his own ranking, even when his sister was the one who had actually done the deed. Although, Shino could understand his pride in his clan. Then Kiba's voice dropped. She said she passed a little boy in orange who had been hurt on her way. She of course sent someone to help him. Kiba had obviously only been told because he knew the boy who had been hurt. There had been a few rumors that he had been the one to steal the scroll. Shino's parents discussed the idiocy of the civilian council at length over their morning meal earlier that day. The reaction that statement received was most likely the cause of the decrease in volume. As he had expected, Hinata was upset. She appeared about to burst into tears. Of course, before she had the chance to ask, Kiba hurriedly continued. She wouldn't tell me who it was or why he was out there, but she did say she checked up on him after she had been debriefed this morning. He had every one of his fingers broken and his back had a big hole in it. Her guess is that the thief got him with an Oma shuriken in hopes that he would distract any pursuers and give them more time to escape. But he should be fine otherwise. Kiba had probably been trying to make that sound less bad than it was. Shino also knew he was holding back on a few things that would probably worsen the situation, but it did little to comfort Hinata, who had gone pale. A ninja's fingers were his tool of the trade. Without functioning fingers, most ninjutsu was impossible. Hinata had also come to the conclusion about who the orange boy was. They had all heard about the ninja who didn't give up. Hinata had done some bragging on him during their introduction yesterday, and everyone in the class knew how he believed he would become the Hokage someday. He would have a hard time doing it with no fingers. 00000. Their Jonin was quite easygoing and had practically tried to become their best friend as well as their teacher. I am Yuahi Kurenai, a specialist with various types of genjutsu. I like to study human psychology, sing karaoke, and work in my garden. I dislike loud drunks and people who are gender prejudice. My most urgent goal is to see all three of you become Jonin. She seemed to look at Hinata with reassurance during the last of that speech. Then Kiba spoke up. I'm Inuzuka Kiba, and this is Akamaru. The loud genin took a dog out of the hood of his fur-lined coat and held him out. As if to acknowledge his introduction, Akamaru let out a series of short yips and barks. Both my mom and sister are ninjas and I hate when animals are treated like trash, just because they aren't human. My goal is to train with Akamaru and become one of the best in my clan. Shino was sure that the mention of Kiba's family members was directly resulted from Kurenai sensei's gender comment. Hinata was the next to speak up. My name is Hyūga Hinata. She was evidently shy. Shino wondered if that had anything to do with the large welt on the side of her face or the reason she smelled so strongly of soap. I like reading and I don't like cruelty. And my goal is to make my father P proud. And at this point Shino had known she was about to say something she thought inappropriate. But that probably didn't mean much. The Hyūgas were a clan of people who believed themselves higher than everybody else. I am in love with Naruto Uzumaki. She had obvious difficulty saying that and Shino couldn't blame her. He was so surprised at just hearing it that he jerked his head to look at her in shock. Which to anyone not familiar with the Aburame clan would have merely appeared to be a slightly quick turn of the head. A declaration like that would probably get her slapped by her father, or rather, it looked as if it had already. He never gives up and neither will I. After that, Shino's own introduction sounded exceptionally plain. Their Jonin, however, could only grin like she had seen the funniest thing in her life. Shino did understand the irony but saw much less humor in it. The daughter of the head family of the most refined clan in the village falling in love with the village pariah. It was like something out of a romance fiction. 00000. Knowing how Hinata felt about Naruto played a big part in what they said to her, resulting in news like this to be extremely precarious. Both Shino and Kiba knew that Hinata would be crushed if Naruto were to be forced to give up his dreams, and Shino was already devising a way to use this to motivate her. Hinata, as your teammate, I feel I must ask your intentions if this person really is Naruto. I realize how much he means to you and don't believe he would appreciate you giving up, if he were to be forced to. Instead of losing your resolve, you might be better redoubling it. so that if he fails you can make up for it, and succeed in his place. Kiba looked at him as if he was relieved that someone else had spoken up. And Hinata's face seemed to regain some color. It was only fated luck that Naruto could have walked right past the window. As he did, they paid for their food and got up to see him. Hinata was naturally quick to see him, but for the other two, it was more of a matter of finding out how he had survived a broken neck and spine. For a short second, Shino almost believed that the information was wrong. But sure enough, there was Naruto, in a neck brace, and his bandaged back was visible through the tear in his shirt. He was also sporting 2 whole hand casts. Casts that snapped as his fingers bunched into fists. Naruto then launched himself at Sasuke. For someone as injured as him, it was surprising to see him take on the top of the class. This was likely even more so for the rookie himself. Sasuke didn't even get a chance. Naruto hit the unsuspecting boy in the jaw with a right hook and then continued to twist around to an odd angle and punched his stomach with his other hand as he untwisted. Then he twisted again and placed his hand on the ground and bent his right leg in half behind him as he brought his left foot up into the bottom off-balanced Genin's jaw. Naruto probably could have killed him by bringing it down just a bit and hitting the jugular. As it was, the audible click as Sasuke was lifted off the ground was a sure sign of broken teeth. Before Sasuke landed on his back, Naruto pushed up with his right arm, which he had currently been doing a handstand on, and flipped over to land on his feet. Sasuke unconscious on the ground and victory achieved, Naruto created a genjutsu image of Sasuke, and walked away. No bragging that he had beaten the genius and no sign of guilt either. He just seemed determined. Why the illusion, Shino could only guess. Hinata started to follow him and then stopped. Now her bravery during the introductions was going to pay off. Go for it. And good luck, urged Kiba. Hearing this seemed to be the boost her confidence needed and she took off. Maybe this time she would be able to tell him. 00000. Hinata followed Naruto as he went down the street and up another. His pace was extraordinary even though it looked like he was just taking a stroll. He saw Sakura and ran up to her. She immediately turned and asked, "Oh, did you change your mind about eating lunch with me?" "Yeah, I guess." She put her arm in his and leaned in. Silently Naruto was happy, but there was a conflict in that she thought it was Sasuke Tem. When Hinata saw him do that, she lost her confidence, but she would follow and see what happened. So Naruto was the only one not to pass the first test. Yeah, and it's a good thing too. If he did, he might have been on our team. I think I'd quit being a ninja if that happened. Being on a team with him would get us killed. Naruto's shock was concealed by the genjutsu, but Hinata was able to see through it. She knew that had to hurt. Besides, he doesn't deserve to be a ninja. Killing him by myself would be easier than being forced to cover for his stupidity. And if he was on our team, I think I actually would have. There's nothing stealthy about bragging over things you haven't even done and hitting on your classmates. Hinata swallowed. She would actually kill him instead of be on his team. With her Byakugan active, she could tell her love was ready to cry. Well, you seem to hit on Sasuke a lot. Oh no, he had slipped. Thankfully Sakura had assumed he had been talking in the third person. Yeah, well, I like Sasuke, and he is more ninja than Naruto Baka will ever be. Sakura turned to him and it seemed to be that she was going to kiss him, but he just kept walking and she had to follow. Why are you even defending him anyway? He's just a parentless annoying little HMF. Well, I think I'd rather he were my teammate than you. Sakura couldn't believe what he had just said. And he kept going, he at least wants to make a difference. But you, all you seem to care about is flirting. I don't need my time wasted with your petty emotions. If you can't fix that, then it would be akin to suicide to be on your team. I wouldn't be surprised if you abandoned the team on the first dangerous mission. In fact, I'm even prepared for it. Wipe that stupid look off your face and get a clue. You are acting the same to me as Naruto acts towards you. Hinata had no idea that Naruto could act that way. He was being deliberately mean, and making it sound exactly like Sasuke. If it weren't for her eyes, she would have thought it was the Uchiha. Naruto walked off and down an alley, leaving a crying Sakura behind. Hinata spared a glance to see she had dropped to the ground and was bawling, before she headed off to follow Naruto. A small voice inside her said that it was good he had finally dumped her. Now maybe he'll notice me. But she instantly felt bad. He shouldn't have to be hurt or to hurt others like that. Once to the next street, Naruto released the genjutsu and began walking back to the academy. That's where he met Sasuke. You two deserve each other, he said, as he passed the roughed-up boy without so much as a look. Sasuke was so surprised at the indifference he waited until Naruto was a few steps ahead before attacking. His feet sending the boy to the ground. The heartbroken boy didn't even try to defend himself and he just got up and kept walking at that slow depressed pace, as Sasuke attacked again, punching him in the gut and sending him back to the pavement. Why don't you fight back? Where's the strength you had before, huh? The Uchiha demanded. Finally, after taking Naruto's collar in his hands and shaking the brat in the air, Sasuke saw the brace on his neck. Dropping his assailant, the Uchiha noticed the bandaging on Naruto's abdomen under his torn shirt. A quick glance at the rest of him found the scars and remains of medical glue from the casts that had been on Naruto's hands. Taking a step back, Sasuke stared at him in shock. He had been this hurt when he attacked him a few minutes ago. What is going on? At the question, Naruto finally looked at him. I just found out how stupid I was for thinking I had a chance. My dream to become the Hokage, to get someone to like me, it's just not gonna happen. No one is ever going to give me a chance. I don't even know why I should care now. What? Sasuke didn't know how to respond. It was like somebody had broken him in the last 5 minutes. I'm done trying. I'm done failing. This stupid village can go and Sakura can too, and you with her. No one would care anyway if there's one less shinobi, or one less kid. Why are you saying that? Sasuke had always been focused on beating his brother. He had a purpose. Even as horrible as it had been for him, at least he had that. Now he saw the real Naruto. His smile was faked, his laugh was faked. He had never even stood a chance. Yet he hadn't given up. The Dobi had even beaten him just a few minutes ago. What had changed? What happened, Naruto? Naruto just sighed and walked away. You two are right for each other. You're both jerks, but hey, at least you have an excuse. Hinata couldn't follow this Naruto. It was too horrible. So instead, she let the two leave her behind and slipped away in silent despair. 00000. The next day her team asked how it went. At first she was reluctant, but if not for them, she wouldn't have even had the courage to see what she had. She had no choice because she owed them for their help. The shy, heartbroken Hyūga began by saying Naruto had met up with Sakura under his genjutsu. At first they seemed angry. Well, Kiba was angry. Shino just asked what they did together. So she told them what had been said and they took Naruto's side immediately. Shino had even offered to send an entire colony of ants to Sakura's house to bite her in her sleep. In slightly different words. When she got to the part with Sasuke, they were surprised. They had seen Sasuke get up after his defeat. He had been livid and out for revenge. But the way Hinata said it, it sounded like he was worried about Naruto. As though the clanless orphan refusing to fight back had meant the end of the village somehow. The rest of the day went by. They met with their sensei and sparred, then did a few exercises and were dismissed. Being told that tomorrow they would receive their first mission. Seeing Team 10 at the barbecue, they decided to join in. With a quick greeting, they began to exchange their first days as genin with each other. Inevitably, that eventually led to Naruto, as well as the injuries he had received. Shino had discreetly informed them to play it down, as if Ino hadn't already known about the Hyūga's crush. And when the blonde girl pressured, Hinata told them the story as well. Ino refused to believe Naruto had beaten Sasuke. However, Shikamaru interjected that if Sasuke saw the injuries, he probably never even tried to defend himself until it was too late, and the argument came to a halt. After which, Hinata continued to say Naruto had run off to catch up to Sakura. She told them what she had overheard Sakura saying to Naruto. However, Hinata hadn't mentioned that he was hanged as Sasuke. As a result, Choji immediately crushed his fistful of food, pushing his plate back. He had obviously lost his appetite. Ino sneered and stated that she didn't think Sakura was that big of a bitch. She decided right then that she would rip the girl a new one the next time she saw her. Even Shikamaru scowled. He then put his hands into his signature thinking pose. The same pose Ino said he used just before beating their sensei as shogi. None of them knew what he was planning though. Instead of telling them what Naruto had said in reply, Hinata skipped it, as it just wouldn't sound right coming from Naruto. And went on to how Sasuke demanded a rematch from Naruto as he was walking home, completely crushed. Then the Hyūga told them about Sasuke seeing that Naruto was hurting inside and tried to find out what had happened. That left Ino to declare that Sasuke really was compassionate to worry about someone who had ambushed him just moments earlier. 00000. It had been almost a week since Naruto was let out of the hospital and the Sandaime hadn't heard from the boy once. Not even a prank. The aging Hokage had seen it several times. He was stuck on getting stronger before, spending over a week, without being heard from, to train. And so the Hokage had looked in on him every now and then, with his crystal ball. Each time though, he seemed to catch the boy sleeping. Probably wearing himself out over the nights when there were more unused training grounds. But today, the Hokage decided to pay him a visit, with the pretense of scheduling his first lesson with his tutor. Realizing that Naruto's outfit had been damaged, the third had a new jacket made for him. It was the same orange as his old one, but it was much tougher and had several hidden pockets. Its design was much the same, a white color and an orange body, and the red spiral on its back. But it also had bright sky blue shoulders that went all the way around the back. So the spiral was half on orange and half on blue, with an orange stripe coming up to the collar, on the center of the chest. Given Naruto's flair for bright colors, it would fit. Today he planned to give it to Naruto. Letting himself in, the elder saw the blonde lying on his couch, and placed the folded jacket on Naruto's chest, before gently shaking him awake. After some greetings, Naruto realized that he had a gift, and just rolled over. Naruto, are you feeling alright? It took some urging, but he managed to get the boy talking. He hadn't left his apartment all week. The entire time since he got out of the hospital he'd been sleeping. At first the Hokage thought to check for genjutsu, or possibly his injuries had worsened after he was checked out. But in the end he was informed that Naruto just didn't want to deal with the world until it was time to go back to the academy. He needed cheering up. If he had lost his will to achieve, then he would very likely lose his will to think before he became a shinobi. Sarutobi needed a way to bring back the old Naruto, the one he could entrust to the future laid out for him, without worry of him becoming the mindless killer the darker parts of the village wanted him to be. And this jacket, the Hokage inspired himself, was just the thing. He held it up and motioned towards the spiral. Do you know what this is, Naruto? When the boy only shook his head, the old man continued. This is the symbol of the Whirlpool village. It was a village that Konoha had been allies with for years, and even after it was destroyed by the war, we continued to wear it as a sign of our friendship with other nations. And now the hook. But to you, the most important thing about it may be, it was the village your mother came from. Before, the Hokage had always refused to talk about Naruto's parents, but the boy was old enough now, that he could keep quiet about them. And with Iruka there to watch him, the boy wouldn't go around bragging or any such misbehavior. I have told you that they died fighting the Kyuubi. But did I ever tell you just how they fought? Your mother and father fought right there as the fourth destroyed the beast. In fact, it was thanks to their efforts that he had a chance to deliver the final strike at all. Both of them were the village's heroes that day. They both knew that they would die. Then why didn't they leave me anything? I don't even have a picture or anything. He was interrupted by Naruto. I have no idea what they look like, and no clue who they really are. They did, Naruto. The Hokage replied sternly, they gave you their hopes and dreams. Your mother was going to become the first female Hokage and your father dreamed of becoming the greatest hero the village had seen. Naruto had gone silent at that. And so the Hokage continued. The fourth Hokage was a position that had more good candidates than any cage before. But they have not lost hope. Every time you say you'll be Hokage is another time you act as they did. You are their legacy, and carry their name, and your mother's whole village, you need to prove it. Naruto looked as though he'd withdrawn upon himself. Sarutobi could see tears welling up. The Hokage spent the next half hour talking about them, telling Naruto several short stories from his parents' childhood. Their time in the academy and as genin. He described her temper and fiery red hair, and his enjoyment of a good prank. He told the boy how they met and how they fell in love. He shared several of these landmarked events from Naruto's parents carefully without mentioning their names or who they would later become. All too soon, enough time had passed that he couldn't stay any longer. Tomorrow you'll start in the academy again. After it lets out, I'd like you to meet me in my office so I can introduce you to your tutor. Naruto nodded, and the Hokage left him to cry. She was pathetic. She was lazy. She was a coward. On and on they talked about her as she walked by. At least none of them had began accusing her of foul play. A young genin kunoichi named Shiho was the worst person in the village according to them. She had been dropped by 2 teams, and had caused the death of a teammate from the second. She didn't deserve to remain a shinobi, even she agreed there. Yet here she was, in the intelligence department. And she was good at it. She wasn't made for combat, but give her mission reports in mountains and she could bring down an enemy village. Like they would ever give her a chance. This life had not been her choice, and again she had asked to quit when her teammate died, but she had nowhere else to turn. No family, no option other than shinobi ranks. She was alone, even as she walked through the crowded cafeteria. All she could do now was keep going and hope that one day, she'd get out of this paper farm and prove how smart she really was. The depressed girl was torn from her brooding when a foot caught her leg, causing her to collapse on top of her meal. Raising herself on her hands and knees, she realized the department head saw her fall, and got up to walk towards her. Quit cowering on the floor, you sniveling brat. If you're not here to eat, then get back to your desk. The elder council may think you belong here, but if you can't shape up, I'll make sure to drive you out. By this time, he had crossed the floor and grabbed a handful of her hair to drag her to the door and shove her to the floor of the other room. As she stood up and silently willed her stomach to silence, Shiho, the pathetic coward of the leaf, hated herself and hated the tears that blurred her now, once again, broken glasses. 00000. The academy was bursting with life and energy. All the students running and yelling and shoving. This was a sight that was quite normal at this time of day. However, it also held a detail that was anything but normal. A single quiet student slowly trudging back into a place he had no wish to return to. As he walked into the academy, he remembered the beating he'd gotten from his sensei. It had happened so fast he couldn't quite recall what he was thinking at the time. And he hadn't even known who it was until he arrived at the school building. His little body shook with rage and betrayal when he found out what his sensei had been arrested for. The man had blamed his crimes on his student. And then had tried to kill him. Naruto had almost felt himself recovering from his bad mood the other day, but now fell into a sea of the pain of knowing someone he trusted had hurt him, and Mizuki wasn't the only one. All this time, the old man had known who his parents were, and he still wouldn't tell the orphan child what their names were. Quietly, Naruto entered the office to find out what room he'd be going to, and was shoved aside by a little kid running from one of the sensei. "Ha! Now try to make me meditate." The boy screamed, turned a full circle sticking his tongue out and ran again. The boy took 2 steps and suddenly he was on the floor. Looking at his feet, Naruto saw the extra long scarf wrapped around the brat's ankle. He couldn't help cracking a grin. This was exactly the type of thing he would pull. "You jerk. You tripped me." Naruto's day just got worse as the boy's words echoed past the sensei, who had finally caught up. "Oh dear. Honorable grandson, are you hurt?" the man asked and sent Naruto a glare. "So you couldn't handle kids your own age and decided to prey upon the younger ones, you beast." He stood and smacked Naruto across the face with the back of his hand. The sting only turned to anger as Naruto continued past them to the desk of the academy head. "Hey sensei, what room am I in?" The man looked at him and swallowed, then tossed a piece of paper at him. Paper in hand, Naruto walked back across the other 2, and on his way, he reached his leg out and kicked the brat's legs out from under him. 00000. Pad, pad, clack, pad, pad, clack, pad, pad, clack. An old man waited on the other, whom he could hear heading this way. Pad, pad, clack. Sarutobi was not looking forward to this. He may be Hokage, but he had only kept the title with the help of his 3 advisors. One of which he was about to anger greatly. "Danzo, it's open." He said it before the more aged of the 2 elders reached the door. "He has failed a 3rd time. Ah, Danzo. No time for pleasantries." Well, there was no point putting this off. However, the Sandame didn't have a chance to speak as the heavily bandaged elder continued. "So why, may I ask, did he return to the academy this year as well?" Unlike the first empty statement, this question held a dark undertone. A mere hint of unrelenting fury. The standing shinobi may have been late in his years, but when he saw the look on his old rival's face, he felt as if he could tear down the entire building just to bury the old bastard under it. "We had an agreement, Sarutobi," he shouted at the cage. "If the slime stools teaching the academy couldn't make the container into a worthy genin by his 3rd try, I would get to train him." "You will still get to train him. However, due to the sabotage in the academy, we have no idea whether or not the academy could help, and I suspect you know plenty about that." He was treading on precarious ground by inferring Danzo was behind it. But this card was his best hope to divert an offensive argument. "Yes, I'm quite aware of how they treated him there. The word slime just isn't derogatory enough for that filth. In fact, I probably know more of what he's been through, because an old senile opened his babbling maw than the babbling senile himself knows." An open insult, referencing his mistake of revealing the boy's condition to the village council. It would lead to a quiet questioning of his capabilities. But Hiruzen would preempt it. "I have decided that he is to attend the academy. And he will." When he is let out of the academy, he will be in your charge. And you may teach him how you will. This statement clearly diverted the other elder from his intended line of discussion, as his voice welled up in his throat. No, I will not waste my time teaching the greatest potential in the village how to read civilian literature. This time his shout held raw hatred. Then make one of your root do it. You stupid old war hawk. Even the honored village leader knew how to yell, it seemed. You can't train him all the time anyway. I know your spies are always watching him. So delegate. I would have thought that secret army of yours would need all the managing you can muster. You shouldn't have all that much free time to begin with. Fine, I will delegate, but not to a shinobi whose time is better spent. His horse rival finally conceded. And now, to lock it in agreement by conceding himself, a minor victory to the other. Good. Take any genin not on already a team that you wish. You can have your pick. His tone clearly translating his exasperation. Even from the team failures going back to remedial classes. Heaving a heavy breath, the elder sat back in his chair. Danzo, I am trying to work with you, but I can't simply give an order and know it will be done without making sure. The boy's health and safety come before your desire for the next great fruit of the tree. 00000. Naruto was currently sitting in the hall of the academy, waiting for anyone to join him in the room he was sent to. Hearing running footsteps, he perked up. Maybe someone was finally here. But no, the person running skidded to a halt just before smacking into him. You. How dare you come back for me? I'm the third Hokage's grandson. When my sensei gets here, you'll be sore OWWWE. The one speaking a moment ago was indeed the grandson of the third Hokage. A boy who desperately needed to beat an old man, so others would see him for who he was. And the reason he was now shouting in pain was the lump on his head courtesy of one orange-wearing piece of trash. They were sensei's words, not mine. Please don't hit me again. Whatever, I don't care who you are. He may be Hokage, but you're still a snot-nosed lying brat. Hey, I'm not a liar. The smaller kid replied. Oh, then why did you lie to that idiot sensei? Naruto challenged, blaming me for your own lousy footing. Well, caught and guilty, the little kid had no other argument out of it. Well, I challenge you. If you win, I'll confess. If not, then you will have to treat me with respect. The boy in orange looked startled at that. For just a moment before, his face was blank again. It almost sounded exactly like he did at that age. Fine. What's the challenge? Pranking. Ninjutsu. A spar. Pranking. Obviously not certain about it. I'd never lose to a little kid on that front. Naruto declared. Then, stealth. The after prank escape skills. You'll never beat me at that. The kid scrambled his words out in a rush to prove himself. Fine, so we make sure they see us both and then head for cover. Right. That agreed. The two disobedient academy students headed out of the building together. By the way, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Konohamaru Sarutobi. 00000. Classes had already begun, but neither Konohamaru nor Naruto had made it to class. They had made sure to run off so others could see that they were there. And then they hid. While they hadn't actually pranked anyone, the fact they made a ruckus on their way out of the building should have drawn everyone to chase them. According to their agreement, the first one caught loses. Konohamaru had it in the bag. He was well hidden, in a secret compartment, in the roof of a closet, in a room no one ever checks. And this Naruto person, he was just standing there, out in the open. Leaned against an upturned desk. His sensei passed and searched, and Naruto slid inside the desk's large top opening drawer. Still, after his sensei had checked the room, no one came after Naruto. What was going on with that? Finally fed up, the kid hopped out of his hiding place to talk to brightly colored boy. Hey, no fair. Why isn't anyone even looking for you? And why did you choose this room to hide in? Huh. The older kid grinned. Oh, they are looking for me. Just. The elder kid chuckled. Not in the academy. He began to giggle. It's been years since the last time I stayed on school grounds after one of my larger pranks. They're probably all over the village looking for me by now. Okay. Now that was weird. His new rival actually left school to hide. Who the hell was this Naruto person? In another hour they'll probably call the Anbu over to prepare for a good prank. Naruto had began having trouble getting his words out as he held his laughter in. You know, try to prevent me from pulling it off this time. He was holding his sides now. Know what? This is actually way funnier than I thought it'd be. The genin-to-be could barely contain his giggling. They'll get all worked up and run all over the place for nothing, and I'll be right here, in an empty classroom the whole time. So they won't even be able to blame me for it. Plus, this is the room number on the paper I was given, so I won't even get in trouble for being late. And his joyful giggles finally built into full-blown laughter. This great awesome prank is all thanks to you, brat. Konohamaru bristled at being called a brat, but this was the first time he was actually looked at him for who and what he was, so he didn't say anything about it. 00000. Most of the day went by, and Naruto regaled Konohamaru with stories and tales of his previous pranks. Many had the boys rolling on the floor. Konohamaru enjoyed his time with Naruto in a way he hadn't done for over a year. He told him of his first prank, with a water bucket. And of his best prank, with a trip wire and a sack of itching powder. He even told him of his most recent prank, confirming the boy's already growing suspicions that he had been the one to paint the monument. It appeared the giggling was too loud. Because after a rather large snort from the smaller child, the kid's sensei arrived. And started in on Naruto for kidnapping the honorable grandson. A grin and a puff of smoke later, the sensei was launched into the air by a massive nosebleed, and where Naruto had once stood was a girl of all things. Konohamaru was thrilled. This kid had just taken out his sensei. The boy demanded to know what the jutsu was. Naruto complied. Thus they found themselves leaving the academy anyway. Shimura Danzo was one of 4 elder shinobi on the Elder Council. The first and foremost being the Sandaime Sarutobi Hiruzen. The other 2 being the Hokage's own teammates. Unlike the village council made up of the clan heads, the top village officials and the civilian-appointed legislatures, members of the Elder Council were all equals when in session. That was the only way Hiruzen could afford to accept their words as honest advice. The village council had slowly grown over time. Granted more and more authority as the years stole from the Sandaime his ability to micromanage the daily duties required of him. As he delegated more to the village council, Danzo too gained more authority. His secret army, for instance, had been prepared to take any mission, no matter what was required to ensure the safety of this village. He planned on using this army to neutralize the civilian council when they inevitably attempted to usurp the power of the Kage's seat. If he didn't get the old fool out of there soon, the man would end up getting himself killed. While they were rivals, he had wanted victory over the village leader, not his absence. Now, he just wanted the man to accept the truth. That the village was going down a spiral pitfall into its own destruction. That may have been why he had been allowed to maintain his route. It was still only one of many safety measures he had taken. Another had been to agree to let the boy be trained by the academy instead of kidnapping him outright, as he now regretted not having done. Once the vessel was his to train in the open view of the village, he would be able to create a massive balance to the scales of power. But that could have only happened if he were given full authority to teach the boy. His first action towards such would have been to grant him shinobi status. But because the old bastard had been too soft to rip him from the tit of the village slime, the child was stuck as a civilian for at least another year. Under their authority and laws, if the old wretch died before his rival could correct this, then one of the first things the civilian council would do would be to kill the so-called demon child. They would intentionally destroy one of the greatest tools the village had. Its single most effective shield from the wars the old fool had been so against. Until he was made a shinobi, by village law the boy wasn't permitted to learn any jutsu C rank or higher. Certainly there were plenty of D ranks he could teach the boy. But those were better taught by his peers, of which he had none who knew them. Well, that could be easily remedied. The bandaged shinobi hobbled his way towards the archives of the cantainer's life. His cane clicked with each tap, and his feet plodded the cold stone floor. He knew exactly what files to pull to bring out the most pity and grief as possible from a kunoichi. Once the prospective genin had been coursed in the boy's past, at least the details he would share with her, she would be tripping over her feet to help him in any way she could. The most effective aspect of this was that he wasn't even deceiving her. Everything in each file he pulled was true. He had already selected the genin from prospective root files. Her first squad had been in combat when she fell ill. Not able to bear the fact that she'd killed someone, the girl had the natural reaction of a weak constitution. And when she was done vomiting, she found herself alone. Forgotten by both her team and her enemies. They dropped her from the team when they returned home. And the second team she was placed in didn't all make it out alive when she lost her nerve. Finally they placed her into a non-combat position. She seemed to do well there, her intellect propelling her through the ranks of clerks until she was recognized for it. Soon she had advanced into the information department. The ones who took the reports from the village's spy networks and analysts to find potential threats or targets. She was a shoo-in for head of the department until she discovered and brought to light the mistake of her immediate superior. A mistake that had resulted in catastrophe. He had been imprisoned and his job given to her. Sadly, the man's own superior had been aware of the mistake and was also punished for his negligence. Blaming his situation on the girl who had found it, he released her past to the others in a method that ensured her abject alienation. Within the month she'd resigned her new position, within the year she'd become a suicide risk. The perfect candidate to be Tada, take the enemy with you, type of fighting style. Her future brightened, as the elder now had a different use in mind. Having already secured permission to inform his chosen attendant of the boy's circumstances, the elder shinobi secured a sizable folder of copied files under his bandages. Really they were as much a blessing as a curse. 00000. Shiho clearly didn't quite understand what the heavily bandaged veteran shinobi meant when he addressed her as a tokubetsu genin. Why yes sir, I mean, am I? I mean, how can I help? That nervousness would have to be dealt with if she couldn't even talk anymore. Perhaps a demonstration of kindness towards her would relax her. It could save time. Besides, if one wanted an easily malleable resource, one had to make them want to comply. You have been reassigned. Reassigned? The genin parroted. Discreetly drawing in a deep breath of air, the elder's nostrils flared as he poured his chakra into the nasal exhale. The stacks of papers that completely obscured her desk flew everywhere, scattering and floating as the air currents shifted them. Many even flew out of her little room. Not an office for sure, it was likely a utility closet they had shoved her into to keep her from interacting with anyone. I am Danzo Shimura, head of the Elder Council. You have been reassigned. This. The crippled elder swept his cane at the papers everywhere, is no longer your employ. Now please follow me, we have much to discuss. Quickly bolting off of her wooden stool, the girl shadowed him as he slowly limped his way out of the room, and towards the exit of the department. As they neared the exit, the department head came storming out of his office. Having felt the winds that ruffled every paper in the department, quickly understood what had happened. Someone had used an air jutsu. Seeing how the greatest disturbance came from the hole he'd stuck Shiho in, infuriated him more. Sure, he'd started it, but disruptive jutsu were not to be used. Once he got her out of the way for the day, he'd dig into the whole lot of them. Oddly, the coward wasn't in her office. No, she was actually leaving. Another quick glance around the room held no mirth, no laughter at a prank. It appeared he had been wrong. She had been the one to use the damn jutsu. What the hell is this mess? Shiho, you worthless little bitch. You get your pathetic cowardly ass over her a ghoul. The moment he saw who the cunt was following, his words choked back. He immediately paled and fumbled backwards. The honorable elder slowly turned to look at him. Holding his gaze for a single moment, while his single visible eyebrow raised in condescension. The man knew he was screwed. This was the same man who had ensured the girl wasn't dropped from the shinobi program. The one who had him demoted when he'd driven her to resign her rank. This was the cold hard stare of the merciless warhawk that could disappear you without a trace. Choking on his own terror, he was ready to beg. D.D. Danzo-sama, I would suggest that you manage your department with a more structured and, the elder nodded at the papers covering the entrance to Shiho's old residence. His own eyes followed to the floor. More properly organized, care. Swallowing at the implications, he quickly began to grovel. Why yes sir, pointing at a random subordinate he called them over to help. Said action resulting in a loud crack. Vibrating off the walls. Everyone's eyes were on the ground by the elder's feet, where he pulled at least 10 centimeters of his unscathed cane, from a perfectly pierced hole it had created in the stone floor. Shaking now, the groveling shinobi fell to his hands and knees and began desperately gathering the mess in his own arms. Turning away, the elder limped out the door of the department and into the hall leading to others. Turning towards the stairs, he quickened his pace, as the girl slowly recovered from her shock and began to follow with more energy. As they finally reached the exit of the building, he heard her whisper a tearful, "Thank you." His limping paused for a short moment, then continued on as if she hadn't said anything. He was fully aware that she understood. The pause was enough to acknowledge it. 00000. Shiho followed the elder through the streets of the village, entering the market area. She had already missed lunch, so the smells of the various food vendors made her stomach gurgle in anger at her. The bandaged shinobi stopped at a bench and leaning heavily on his cane lowered himself down. With a heavy sigh, the crippled man set his cane aside and rubbed one of his legs with his one usable hand. Not knowing what else to do, Shiho simply stood there, accepting the weight while her new boss rested. Reaching into the secured pocket in his bandages, Danzo-sama pulled out a small money purse. Setting that on his bandaged arm, the man took out a couple bills and pointed at the shop down the block. A dango stand. Figures, Shiho thought, they had come into the market district to get food. Why else would they be here? 2 sticks, dipped in curry please. He handed her the bills, and she rushed to fill the order. When she came back, however, the elder simply put the container they were in, beside him on the bench. Looking up at her expectantly. It's rude to make an old man eat by himself. He gestured at the rest of the stalls around them with a sweep of his arm. I can wait. Feeling her stomach grumble, the genin ran back to the dango stand, pulling out her own money. Returning to the bench a second time, she saw that while he now had his dango in his lap, the spot on the bench where they had been when she left, was now occupied by a thick multi-flapped folder. The elder made a gesture for her to sit on the other side of the folder from him. As they sat silently, they began eating. It wasn't until they were mostly done with the meal that he spoke. The contents of this file is your new assignment. The boy it regards is of great importance to the village. And he has suffered many terrible events in his lifetime. Boy. How could a boy be an assignment? Shiho hoped she wouldn't have to hurt him or anything like that. He is not just any boy. Your assignment would be a waste of time if that were the case. The man's lips twitched upward, hinting at a smile. He is the Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tails Fox. The elder said it so nonchalantly. Like an old man discussing the fishing season. She knew the way her half-full mouth hung open must have been gross, but she couldn't help it. He had just outright told her she would be working with the nine-tailed demon beast. Not that the boy was so dangerous, but what if it broke out of him? And worse, what if the third found out they were talking about it? In the open, almost as if he had read her mind, the elder spoke. Say whatever it is that you need to. I have placed a genjutsu around us to confuse the sounds of our words and shapes of our lips. You may speak freely, though I would suggest you go over the file first. His final words ended with his empty dango stick pointing at the folder between them. Quickly finishing her own meal, Shiho picked up the file and began flipping through it. On the first page were 3 photos. Beside each was a short reference to the age, health and status of the target. Picture 1, a baby in the arms of a shinobi. Looking closer, she saw the hands held a certain pattern of wrinkles that when aged further, would greatly resemble someone very, very high up. To think that the third himself had been caring for the boy. The notation stated age being 1 week, health still critical, attempt failed. Whatever that meant. Ref number 0006-1016-0128, what was the 0128 for? Obviously the rest of it was the date. Everybody knew when the demon had been defeated, and that meant it had been 6 days after the sealing. 6 days from his birth, October 16. Moving on, the next was a small boy, his clothing ripped and filthy, his body so thin they didn't fit. His hair was blonde, but it had taken her a moment to figure that out. From all the filth and grime it was almost black. The notations here stated age at 5.49, okay, was that 4.9 out of 12 or out of 10? Homeless status discovered, action taken. Ref number 02005-0324-4663. So it was in March and he had lived for 2005 days. But again 4663. The third image was an older boy, the same one. In a bright orange jumpsuit. His face smeared with paint and his eyes defiant. This one was also held by a shinobi. But not the Hokage this time. It was an academy instructor. And the boy was hanging off his shoulder by a rope. Said rope was tied around the boy several times. This was the boy, the demon child that everybody disliked for no solid reason. The one who painted the monument 11 days ago. And the picture was probably of the very same day. Ref number 04471-0109-29823. It had only been about 3 months since his birthday, making him 12. And again with the mystery number. The boy would fail the shinobi exam the very next day. Now she understood. The boy had failed the exam last week. Her job was likely to supplement his education. If the Hokage allowed him to take the test a 4th time, then the boy damn well had to pass, didn't he? Turning to the next pages, the genin brain began to read about his infancy, almost immediately understanding the meaning behind those final numbers. Events 1 to 3 all day 1, birth, sealing, and discovery. Event 4 on day 2, the Hokage informed the village council about the boy's condition. Event 5, that same day. A council member attempted to kill the boy with a knife. Event 16 on day 3, when feeding him, a trusted nurse injected a corrosive substance into his body, melting his veins from the inside out. Her son was being held hostage in a genjutsu by the former Kurama clan head. They were both executed, and the clan was passed to the man's brother and pregnant sister-in-law. Shiho recalled that they later died in a house fire. Event 49, 4 days old, the Hokage killed 2 civilians who had publicly announced the boy's condition. Everybody who had heard were detained by the military police and processed by the Yamanaka clan. Event 128 on day 6, the Hokage fought off an assassin with the boy in his arm. Literally single-handed. With the exception of the first 3, each event was a new page and it grew worse with each one. They told what happened, how it happened, and what was done about it. Some even referenced other files, events, and dates. His childhood, his life, the horrors continued page after page. As Shiho read, her face grew pale, then green. Tears fell freely down her cheeks. She truly wished she hadn't eaten the dango. Turning away from the file, Shiho swallowed the bile rising in her throat. She couldn't read any more. This was merely a collection of random files pulled out for her education. It was missing hundreds of entries, and she had only been through his first 2 years. It was disgusting. Keep reading, the gravelly voice of her new boss felt like an actual impact. You haven't even reached the bad parts yet. Jerking her head to the elder, Shiho was horrified at his words. 00000. That afternoon had been the best either of the boys had ever had. They pranked several unsuspecting victims, Kono-chan got his first real look at girls, and Naruto found he really liked being called boss. Naruto even began to forget the depression he'd fallen into. Konohamaru had acknowledged him. He had found his first real friend. It started with Naruto trying to teach Konohamaru the jutsu, which led to research on the body, which got them in trouble, but they got away. Then the younger boy decided that they should do real pranks. So they gathered the supplies and picked out the targets that Konohamaru had a grudge against. As the day passed, Naruto kept teaching his new friend how to do the jutsu, and when each prank followed through they laughed and spent more time training. The first in line was the teenager who had babysat him. She wasn't that bad, but she was a total tool. She reported everything he did down to his bathroom use to Ebisu. The way he said the man's name got Naruto thinking this guy must be something. But Konohamaru told him, they would have to prank him last. They doused her in a liter jar of ink, it covered her and her cloths, as well as her pouch and all of her tools. Looking at her outfit and hair in the mirror didn't do as much as they thought, so they dumped at least 20 pounds of salt on her too. When she finally washed all the ink and salt off, she was devastated. Her skin, which she apparently rubbed lotion on for an hour every day, had been stained and dried up like old leather. She actually screamed in agony at her appearance resembling an old cow hide. After that, it was the man who had spanked his son till he was a whimpering snot ball, for using a bad word in front of the honored grandson. That had been the reason kids his age refused to go near him. The man found himself half and hung out to dry by a thong. The Anbu found him too, and were not pleased by his lack of clothing. There were 3 others that they pranked, and during the stealth and hiding part of the prank, they trained. It wasn't long before Konohamaru was able to create a truly appealing henge. Naruto explained to him what it meant to work hard, and the real path to becoming Hokage wouldn't come from any shortcut. Taking his words to heart, Konohamaru prepared to declare their rivalry. But he couldn't. He had seen the way Naruto was looked at. He had heard the whispers about how the demons should never have been let back in the academy. And he was truly sorry for getting the older boy hit. Instead, he declared them to be lifetime friends. And that from now onwards they would be united as brothers. Naruto was shocked, even began to cry. Konohamaru was lost. What could he do? He didn't have any experience with crybabies. And he didn't even know what he'd done to start this. Then he found himself in Naruto's grip, his arms wrapped around him in a tight shaking hug. Calming down, the younger boy returned the hug. Realizing what had happened, he had been told Naruto didn't have an family. And to have officially declared himself the orphan boy's family was like granting a wish to his new friend. Family. The one thing in the world an orphan would wish for more than anything, more than even becoming the Hokage. 00000. Ebisu was livid. He had heard of all the trouble that the two had been getting into. And he searched everywhere for them. When he found them, he was taken aback. Konohamaru had never been able to henge into his grandfather before, and that was his favorite henge to try. Much less a random teenage girl that walked by. And this demon brat had somehow taught the honorable grandson how to copy the image of almost any girl that walked by. So he stopped and listened. What had the demon done to get the boy to focus? As he listened, he heard the boy explaining the value of hard work, not that he believed the boy even followed his own words. Hearing Konohamaru's declaration of family was as much a shock to the Jonin as it was to the failed genin trainee. And how deeply the boy reacted. Ebisu had no doubt that if Konohamaru asked him at that time, the demon would have done anything for him. This was the boy that the Hokage always said his was overlooking. The child who only wanted a friend. Stepping out, the Jonin snapped his fingers. Both boys jumped away from one another and drew kunai. Why the hell did the honorable grandson have a live kunai? Naruto Oni, take him out like you did my other sensei. Complying with the younger boy's request, the village disaster immediately exploded in a cloud of smoke. Ebisu quickly forgot the sympathy that had rooted in his heart. What the hell have you two been doing? What kind of jutsu is that? The man quickly moved forward, striking Naruto's neck. It wouldn't knock him out, but it would hurt a lot. And that would cause him to drop the perverted henge. Or at least, it should have. Uzumaki-san, while I am pleased to see you are well, when I delivered your broken body to the hospital, I wasn't saving your life so you could ruin his. That caught both of the boys off guard. I would kindly ask that during your stay in the academy you avoid the honorable grandson. I am not trying to be cruel, however I can't permit him to be associated with you. Public stigma. Put simply, people don't like you, and if the two of you are around each other, I'm afraid they'll begin to dislike him too. He restated it so that no matter how dumb the demon brat would understand. The Hokage has assured me that while the two of you are going to the same building, you will be kept in separate rooms. If at all possible, I would request that you don't negate his assurances. Naruto stood from where he had fallen, still rubbing his neck, and also still a teenage girl. There was a little respect to be had for a child his age to maintain the jutsu after a tendon strike. Look, mister, I'm glad you helped me out, but I ain't gonna abandon my new little brother, not even if you beat the hell out of me. He wasn't going to win, he knew that, and they knew that. But he also wasn't going to give up either. Konohamaru had improved his henge so much over a few hours, and he really did need a friend. I tell you what, boys, I could allow you to hang out. I am willing to let it happen. But only if you stay under a proper henge and distance yourselves in public. Think of it as training. There are many missions in which contacts must pass information without others knowing about it. If he pulled this off, then it might actually work to the boy's favor. Besides, Hokage-sama always had good things to say about the demon. And the boy appeared to be genuinely kind to Konohamaru. After they had been convinced, he explained to Naruto what henge he wanted, and they agreed on it. They also set down some rules on proper activities. Ebisu lost that argument. Yes, trap making was important for a shinobi. Yes, stealth and evasion was important for a shinobi. Yes, this was a shinobi village. Yes, the people should be prepared to handle things much worse. No, it wasn't a good thing they were able to do it so easily. Yes, they were allowed to do it as long as no actual laws were broken or people were hurt. Yes, he felt like an idiot for overlooking those details of the Uzumaki training style. Yes, he was going to hurt them if they kept teasing him. No, he wasn't going to show mercy. Yes, this was a form of training. It was a more advanced form of evasion, in which the enemy knows where you are, and will hurt you once he catches you. 00000. Shiho was sick, she had actually puked in front of her new boss. Twice. The man had calmly held her hair back as she heaved. It was devastating, humiliating, and entirely justified. How could any one child be the target of so much hate? And why had the bandaged old man made her look at those images of the child's fate? The face of an 8-year-old screaming as his skin had been peeled off, the crushed head of a child who had been ran over by a produce cart. The weeping of a 4-year-old whose toes were frostbitten and bleeding as he dug through garbage for food. The root never intervened unless his life was at risk, and many times that was simply to alert others. One such event led to the parents of a birthday party to be butchered by a lightning jutsu in front of all the kids who had been there. The Jonin had been placed in jail for a month, and the boy whose parents had died vanished a week before his release. There was even a 2-week time in which Root had lost track of the boy. He was later found in an apartment 3 down from his own by an unknown medic nin. Shiho recognized the dates. They were a few weeks after that string of women started to disappear, and about a month before the Uchiha were wiped out. It was thought that the one killing them had been an Uchiha because that was when it stopped. Her only solace was that the very same Jonin who had saved him when he was being skinned alive, was also charged by the Hokage to relieve him of the traumas. Utilizing his implanted duojutsu to remove any trace of the worst memories. When she reached the end of the file, they talked it out and came to an understanding of her job. The elder explained how he intended to teach the boy and what risks there were. She was relieved to know that the boy had been receiving biannual seal checks by the Toad Sage and Seal Master Jiraiya ever since they found him after those 2 weeks. From now on, she would spend the time he was in the academy either training herself up or preparing lessons to use with his education schedule. She was in charge of ensuring his good grades, and forcing him to behave properly. As such, she would be given an apartment next to his while both her new and old apartments would now be paid for by the village. She was only required to stay there for the weekdays, and she had weekends off. Not only that, she had to ensure he ate properly and bathed and basically mother him until he was a normal person again. The pay was good, great even if you counted the rent of 2 apartments in it, plus anything she thought would be needed in the boy's training was to be provided by the village, so no expenses would be incurred. He had even told her to keep receipts of food she buys for him so she could be reimbursed. The elder told her right out, that as long as she eat her meals with him, she would never have to pay for her own food again. So basically she was being paid to be his mother and all expenses involved in that were covered. The mission lasted only until he either died or made Chunin. But there were limits. If he died for any reason, her fault or not, she went to prison. He had to make genin on his next try or she went to prison. If he did anything that could get him sent to prison, she went to prison. If she screwed up their relationship in any irreparable way, she went to prison. At that she wasn't sure the pay would be enough, but here, at this point of the job description, is where it got frightening. This job was non-optionable. If she wished to decline it, you guessed it, she went to prison. 00000. Uzumaki Naruto was not the only one who had returned that year. Far from it. Almost half of the others in his class had failed the second test. Iruka told him that they usually would have kept him in the previous class, instead of the senior class. However, he had failed 3 times and the Hokage was certain it would be his last year there. As it turned out, there was a second test that many of them had to take. While they were all technically genin now, they were not allowed on missions yet, and they still had to pass the remedial course. Iruka discussed this with the whole class, explaining how they would be taught and promoted now that the elite selections were over. Once you passed the first exam, you had to be taken on as a student. If you weren't, it didn't mean you weren't a genin anymore, just that you didn't have a team. The senior class was a course meant to train you up to mid-genin level in all aspects. Basically, the students all had to have the grades that the last year's rookie made. Then, once at an appropriate skill level, they would be assigned Chunin instructors to take them on D ranks until a Jonin was available to retest them for teams. It wasn't like they were being held back. In fact, they would likely be much more rounded as a shinobi in general if they spent time in the general pool before joining the genin squads. But those who displayed the key aspects of a shinobi were usually grouped together from the start, such as clan kids and bloodline users, or prodigies. Every few months the new batch of potentials would be tested, and shortly after that, the Jonin who had failed their teams would retest the seniors. Once accepted, they would be taken out of the general pool. But those who continually lacked the key aspects would continue to fail their retesting until they made Chunin on their own. At which point they were mostly doomed to be Chunin forever. Many of them would work for years to make Chunin. While the genin lead by their personal Jonin sensei would be in the Chunin exams either the first or second year after graduating. It was almost impossible for a Chunin promoted out of the general pool to become a Jonin. 00000. Naruto listened to his sensei explain his future with dread. That meant that until he got a sensei that liked him, he was going to be stuck here. As the lecture came to an end, he saw the same despair reflected on many of his classmates, including several who were much older than him. It seemed that each time they failed they had to come back to classes even if they were up to par. After being retested the morning of the first class, which he had missed, many of these genin would be out of here the next day, while the rest would hang back and train in the general pool classes until they could be tested at least once more. Racing out of the academy, Naruto headed to the Hokage's office. The old man had told him to meet him there for some kind of mini-sensei type thingy so he wouldn't want to be late. Most of the kids hadn't even escaped the building by the time he arrived in the Hokage's office. Oi, Gigi, I'm out, and I'm ready for anything, he declared as he entered the room. The Hokage stood at the window, watching as the children flooded out of the academy. Naruto, Shiho here is going to escort you to your new training sensei. The third turned and gestured to a blonde teen who stood to one side of the doors he'd just blasted through. She had long pale yellow hair tied back in a messy tail, and broken glasses that hung crookedly off her bruised face. Through them, Naruto could see puffy red eyes, welling up with tears as they looked at him. She had to be at least a year or two older than him. She was going to be taking him to his new sensei. Must be his secretary, or something. I am pleased to meet you, Naruto-kun. I look forward to our work together. Kun. Had he heard her correctly? They would be working together. For now we will be meeting Danzo-sama in Training Ground 29. As we walk I recommend we get to know each other. Danzo-sama has very little available time to spend with us in person. Training Ground 29. The Hokage's eyebrows rose. The basement under the oaks. I suppose he would choose that one. Inform Danzo-kun that I'll have it sequestered for his personal use. That got both of the teens to jump. Even Naruto knew that having a whole village training ground for personal use was big, even if he didn't know what sequesting meant. Standing in the Hokage's office was a usually bad thing for Shiho. In her past career as a shinobi, she had been in this office for missions with a team, and for debriefings on how those missions went wrong. This time was almost worse. She was here to collect a 12-year-old boy who was going to be the entire focus of her life for the next year. If she screwed this up in any way, she would be sent to prison. She had been waiting in the office since 10 minutes before the academy classes were supposed to let out. The Hokage himself stood at the window. And just as the classes began making their usual hustle out of the building, the doors to the Hokage's office burst open and there stood her assignment. His outstretched foot in the air easily depicting how he had opened the door. "Oi, Gigi. I'm out. And I'm ready for anything," he declared as he entered the room. It was more painful than she had thought it would be, seeing the boy she had read so much about. She couldn't help but wince as she looked at him. In her mind's eye, his face had half of its skin peeled off, and his toes had blackened from exposure. Each of the photos from that file played across her mind as he announced his presence. He was small for his age, smaller than most 12-year-olds. If she had to guess based off only his size and appearance, she'd say he was 10. And that happy attitude of his that just seemed to exude brightness into every corner of the room. "Naruto, Shiho here is going to escort you to your new training sensei." The sandaime turned and gestured for her to step forward. Shiho felt her eyes starting to water as his joyful attention shifted to her. She must not mess this up, her mind repeated the mantra over and over. "I am pleased to meet you, Naruto-kun. I look forward to our work together." He blinked, surprised by the familiar greeting from a stranger. For an instant she felt a stab of guilt. She had read all those personal things about him and he had no idea. He didn't even know anything about her yet. She felt like she had been spying on him. Well, she was a shinobi, so she shouldn't feel too bad for it, right? She'd just have to share some things about her then. For now we will be meeting Danzo-sama in Training Ground 29. As we walk, I recommend we get to know each other. Danzo-sama has very little available time to spend with us in person. It was true, the elder had no intention of overseeing Naruto's training until he actually made genin. That wasn't to say he wouldn't be watching. His private security force was always watching and reporting back to him. Furthermore, he did intend to evaluate her progress with the boy once per week. Training Ground 29. The Hokage's voice was slightly surprised, as his eyebrows rose. The basement under the oaks. His brow went from high to a deep curl. "I suppose he would choose that one. Inform Danzo-kun that I'll have it sequestered for his personal use." Shiho couldn't help but jump at that. Sequestering a training ground for personal use was only done for large groups or after weeks of petitioning. And even then it was only for an allotted amount of time. And the unspoken implication that the Hokage would have it sequestered for as much time as Danzo-sama wished was enough to make her dizzy. It may have been within his power to do so, but Shiho was still surprised that the Hokage would just issue it so casually as that. Was Naruto's improvement that vital to the village? Or was Danzo-sama's influence just that heavy on the Hokage? After saying their goodbyes to the Hokage, the two of them departed. Shiho once more gave thanks to the Jonin who had repressed Naruto's memories. She almost couldn't reconcile that horrible file and the boy in front of her, happily following her out of the office and into the streets of the village hidden in the leaves. As they made their way through the village, Shiho gave another introduction, this time including her likes, dislikes, hobbies and what she used to do. Naruto replied with his own. She only half listened to him as he told her about himself. Most of it were things she had already learned from the file Danzo-sama had on him. His obsession with ramen caused by the supplemental spices that the Hokage had them add, as well as the presence of the one girl who had actively stood up for him as a child. His dream to become Hokage, his dislike of people who treat him badly. Shopping, waiting for ramen to finish cooking, and sitting through boring classes. Once he had finished telling her his version of his life story, she told him a few more minor details about hers. What she liked to eat, what her favorite places in the village were, and at his request, she gave him a much more detailed description of her job as an archive clerk. She asked him some of the important data she needed to know before they could continue. Mostly about what he did with his day. How much he studied. Not at all, was not the answer she had hoped for. She asked what he liked to do and who he liked to hang out with, his few friends being 2/3 of the Inoshika Choin and Inuzuka. Those three people were already listed as his cohorts in that file. But then he also said he liked Uchiha Sasuke. According to that file, they acted like they hated each other, but Naruto seemed to see them as rivals. And the Uchiha boy was the only other person he knew that was as alone as he was. When he finished explaining why he liked Sasuke, Shiho was waiting for him to start talking about the Haruno girl, but it never came. From that file she knew that the girl had been excessively abusive to him and he continued to ask her out. This was thought to be a result of her behavior and her having pink hair, which was close enough to his mother's red hair for an Oedipal influence. According to that file, she had actually fractured Naruto's skull upwards of 20 times. And there were many more times that they couldn't confirm the extent of the damage her fists had caused. If there had ever been a singular reason for his poor grades, brain damage was in the top 3. When he went silent instead of bringing her up, Shiho asked about her. From the data in that file, he should have been madly in love, and outspoken about it, but his reaction was hurt. Surely if something had happened between the two of them, that file would have mentioned it. She knew how bad it hurt to be alone, and isolated, and rejected. So stopping him for a moment, she asked about it. What had happened? It took a little effort, but Naruto eventually told her that he had tried to trick the girl into talking about him by using a henge of the Uchiha. What she said wasn't very nice. While he wouldn't tell her exactly what was said, Shiho could easily understand what had happened. The little bitch had probably been trying to impress the Uchiha boy by putting down the other. Taking a breath to collect her voice, Shiho explained that sometimes girls like that will say things they don't mean about people to others so that they would feel more liked, and that when they do say things like that, they have no intention of ever letting the one they were talking about hear them talking like that. It was a sure thing that she hadn't actually meant what she said, and she only said it because she wanted Sasuke to like her. Naruto was quiet as he clearly had trouble understanding why someone would do that. Shiho decided to speed it along and told him that it was summed up by saying they were being two-faced bitches. Leaving the topic of his love life behind, Shiho began to quiz Naruto over most of the curriculum he should already know. She wasn't surprised that he was doing so poorly, but the repeated looks of despair and confusion that passed over his face left her severely irked. Moving on, she told him that she would soon be moving into the apartment next to his and if he needed any help she would be there for him. Naruto was shocked that the Hokage would go that far to help him graduate. She explained that her moving was more about his health and her convenience than his grades. She was going to be moderating his diet and teaching him how to shop, clean, and soon enough, even how to shave. She had actually asked Danzo-sama to arrange for her move to be permanent. They had offered to let her keep her old apartment as well as the new one, but she didn't really want to cut her life in half like that. She planned on moving her things tonight when they were done with the introduction. From there, Shiho told him about the schedule they were to keep. First, he would wake up in the morning and she would eat breakfast with him. Then she would walk him to the academy for the senior class. Danzo had been the one to pull the strings to get him in that class instead of being sent back a year behind. Naruto loudly expressed his gratitude for that. As he may have learned in the first session, that class was only a stopgap between graduation and being placed on a team. It appeared that given his record he wouldn't be placed on one unless things changed drastically. So they were going to have to work on his basics and make him into a good shinobi before he graduated. Normally one graduated and if selected was taught all the finer details of shinobi life by their sensei. After a sensei failed a team they would go and select 3 random senior students who had completed the additional course to retest. Meanwhile the failed team would be placed in that class and trained up until their basics were all mastered. They were worked until they were at mid-genin level on all aspects of shinobi life. Once they completed the course they would go on missions with Chunin who would start each of their genin records. And it was based off the genin record that you were assigned missions, or selected for retesting. If you failed the retesting then you went back every 6 months for the 3-month course. Some genin had been allowed to simply retake the course completion exam and continue taking missions but that was only the repeat genin. One run through the remedial course usually pushed the students far past the skill levels of those who had been selected in the first round. However, then they would only be sent out on missions with Chunin until they had a certain level of experience, while the passing selected genin would be out on C and B ranked missions by that time. Most jonin refused to take a second round team unless they had earned the rank. By the time they were selected many of them had been trained as good as some Chunin. There were many Chunin rookies who wouldn't last a minute against a freshly selected general pool genin. The point of training them up that much was so that they could be worked harder until they either proved themselves worth the jonin's full instruction the way that first round students were, or until they could be promoted to Chunin and join the general ranks. Almost all of these had completed the course, worked under a Chunin for no less than 3 months and were trained by jonin for at least 6 months before being entered into the exam or given a field promotion. There were however a solid few who had been promoted to Chunin without a jonin's instruction. Not a single one of those had ever made jonin. As it was, Naruto still had to pass the genin test before he could even take the course completion exam for the genin level classes. When he passed that one he would have 2 shots at the completion exam. The first was right after the genin test. The second was 3 months later. He had 6 months to become a general pool genin. So the best thing they could do would be to get his grades up so he could be selected for retesting as soon as the next academy graduation exam came along. So he had no choice except to force himself to the very top of the class. His grades had to come up all over the place. And to that end, when classes let out she would meet him at the academy and they would go over everything he had learned that day. No matter what it was, she would go over it with him again. This is where she informed him that she was going to be receiving the daily lesson plans from his teachers every day, as well as a report on his behavior. Her treatment of him would depend on his actions and efforts to improve. She could take him out to eat when they were done, or she could give him bread and water, she could be nice to him, or she could be cold. She would never be cruel or hurt him, but she wouldn't allow him to think his actions were without consequences. Depending on how long it took to revisit that day's class lessons, they would head to Training Ground 29, where they would train on the things Danzo-sama had planned for them. And once a week they would have a meeting with the man himself. Naruto seemed a little upset when he realized that meant he wouldn't have any more time to mess around. No more pranks, no more vandalism, and no more unsupervised free time. Not wanting to completely stop the pranks, Danzo-sama had prepared her for this. His few best pranks were feats of skill completely disproportionate to his current level of ability. Therefore they would harness that in the most productive way the elder was able to invent. Don't be so bummed out Naruto-kun, Shiho began, we have allotted a sizable span of time for you to engage in your creative activities. The boy looked at her and blinked as if he had no idea what any of her words meant. Danzo-sama was quite impressed by your pranks over the last year, and by your capture record. The sole fact that you managed to even evade a few members of the Anbu makes your extracurricular activities a strategic advantage in your training. Therefore, our master has purposefully included them into your training. He will even assist you in preparations and facilitate your missions. At the word, missions, she made quotation gestures with her hands and grinned. Danzo-sama had only a few requirements of the boy before he could prank someone. First, he had to have a motive. Why would he do it, and what did he gain? Second, how would he do it, and how would he escape? And third, what skills or information would be needed for it and why? Finally, after the so-called mission, he was required to submit a pseudo-mission report detailing what he did, how it went, what went wrong, why and how could he improve. As long as he did this, he could do any prank he wanted. Of course, if he got caught, he was required to either prove it wasn't him or accept full responsibility. He was forbidden from revealing he had any assistance. And the final part was that he would be given the full penalty instead of the leniency that the Hokage had been granting him. Which meant bad things for him. And that meant bad things for her too, very bad things. 00000. Long before they actually arrived at the training ground, they saw a walled-off forest of the largest trees Naruto had ever seen. The wall itself was gigantic once they got close. It had to be at least 4 stories high. But for a long time, while they were still a good distance away, he could see that the trees were at least 2 or 3 times that height. This training ground was technically outside the village since the closest part of the wall was part of the ones that circled the village. And it looked like it went all the way around the training ground as well. As much as he wanted to go into the forest and see what it looked like, they instead opened a massive gate that laid at an angle over an opening. It wasn't flat on the ground, but it wasn't standing up either. And the area around it was almost solid stone. Not paved like a road or wall, but actual rock-hard stone. Behind the gate was a stairway. The air seemed to tingle over his body as he entered. It felt like he was being tickled inside his bones. The stairway led deep into a cold and dark different stairway that was wider and less steep. Their descent slowed considerably as they crossed to the next stairway. A little further and it happened again. Naruto had no idea how far down they were, but they had been walking for over 20 minutes. Then the stairs turned out into a well-lit room. This room had many things stored in it. There were lots of shelves with food, tools, and even medical stuff. At the back was a rack of weapons. And a door to what looked like a full toilet and bath. Crossing this room, they opened another set of doors that lead into a hall. Again, Naruto felt weird things when he entered. And the feeling kept changing and twisting inside him as he followed Shiho-chan down the hallway. Once at the end of the hall, they opened a final set of doors. These were huge. They were as thick as his arm was long, and there were more than one of them. Passing under the raised doors, Naruto felt a sensation far stronger than any of them they had passed through before. His body actually flinched and cringed as he struggled to move through it. If not for Shiho grabbing his jacket and pulling him the rest of the way out of the weird spot under the door, he wasn't sure he would have made it. Naruto-kun, it's okay, we're through. Naruto-kun, are you okay? Shiho's pleading voice barely registered at first, but the haze began lifting after a few seconds. And then it was suddenly gone. I'm all right, Naruto told her. Opening his eyes, he gasped at the sight of what the old man had called the basement under the oaks. It was enormous. Even with how far down they had gone, the place they were standing at was only halfway down to the bottom. The ceiling was high up, so high he almost couldn't see it before it got dark. Hanging from it were massive roots that fell from metal rings in the top. A few of these rings had lanterns hanging from them. Looking across, he could see the walls of the basement. It had to be as big as an entire district of the village. And down in the ground was an open area with many different types of land on it, from a small pond to cliffs that climbed up the walls. There were even pillars that went all the way up to the top. Training Ground 29, codenamed the basement under the oaks, was made in order to test explosive ninjutsu shortly after the village's founding. The Uchiha and the Senju worked together to build it so that the jutsu they created wouldn't cause damage to the village. Shiho had launched into a descriptive narration as if leading him on a tour. The trees above us are Mokuden oaks created specifically to devour any excess chakra released here. This is also where Uchiha Madara train in the use of Kyujiten, a form of jutsu revolving around battle with the Biju fox of the nine tails. In truth, it was where he trained to enslave the fox's mind so he could battle the Shidaime Hokage Hashirama Senju. But according to the deep records that she had browsed through, the village hadn't found out about that until the Uchiha legend had attacked. That certainly explained why Danzo-sama had chosen this place. Now, however, it was used for jutsu research. Mostly so other shinobi could train and invent new jutsu somewhere safe, where they couldn't cause too much damage or have their work stolen. Although Shiho didn't share much of this information with the younger teen, she was fascinated by its history. So what was up with the weird air in the hallway? Naruto asked, his eyes still taking in everything he could see. Those were barrier seals, set up to contain any rampant chakra that got out of hand. Will it always hurt like that? It's not supposed to hurt at all. However, there is something, usually some trait or gene that makes a few people sensitive to its effects. It's nothing bad, and you'll be okay. But you will feel like that for the first few times you go through it. After a while you'll get used to it until the feeling begins to barely affect you. Silently, Shiho suspected that she knew what it was, and determined to inform the elder about the additional effect of the seal. Taking her explanation at face value, Naruto wondered how she knew about it. Have you ever been here before? No, but I have been to one similar. There are several other training grounds, labs and even file offices that have seals like those in place. However, this one has the most extensive matrix of seals of them all. And it's also not the only training ground they have that's underground either. There are training grounds under almost a third of the others, and a few that are even under the village districts. As they talked, they slowly descended the rest of the way to the floor, where they found the elder sitting on a bench which Shiho was certain he had created using jutsu just so he could sit. 0000. They had arrived. His short time with the girl had already helped her to become exactly what the elder needed for the vessel. She was already mindful of his words and actions without having to force herself to keep her attentions on him. And more importantly, his slight manipulations had third-generation payoffs. Just as he had predicted by leaving out the little spat about the abusive crush, he had opened up an avenue that Shiho hadn't been able to not ask about, leading to an almost instant offer of emotional support. The boy had opened up, when her sincere concern shone through. Exactly as he had anticipated. His previous attempts at placing someone near the vessel had failed. Naruto seemed to have an acute sense of a person's intentions when he was younger. While it didn't seem to have stayed with the boy, the elder was ambivalent to test it so soon. His agent who shadowed them had only just relayed the information via use of an ink jutsu that transcribed every word he heard onto the corresponding paper. Once they began down the stairs, the jutsu was cancelled. He could hear them now. The jutsu was no longer needed. Everything was going exactly as he planned. If they continued to do so, then he would have little trouble salvaging this disaster. And old Sarutobi would have no choice but to accept the vessel among the genin ranks by the upcoming exam. Once a few of his more honed pranks were pulled off, he would easily be granted a field promotion to genin, and just in time for him to master a couple jutsu he would need for the exam. If this worked, then both Shiho and Naruto would be entered into the same exam as the Uchiha. Of course, that was only the very best of outcomes. There was little actual chance of things going so well. But there was some hope. What Naruto needed was a mother. And Danzo had successfully created the closest thing to an elder sister as he could for the boy. His next step would be to introduce himself, make the child feel respectful and awed. And then make him grateful before sealing in the loyalty by revealing, at greatly expressed personal risk, the boy's lineage. Once that was out, he would have no trouble convincing the Naruto to hide his true training from the village. The elder didn't dare teach the Jinchuriki any truly powerful jutsu until he knew the boy could keep them hidden. And the sooner he could begin teaching him in earnest, the sooner he could get him in the shinobi ranks where he could do so publicly. He didn't expect Naruto to make Chunin anytime soon, and it wasn't likely that he'd be able to join the exam this time. But it wouldn't take more than a single year for him to make Chunin if trained properly from this point out. 6 months of full quarter training, 3 months under a few Chunin and 3 more directly under the elder's tutelage, and he joins the exam after this one. Give him a couple aces, and he was sure to be promoted. Once he made Chunin, there was nothing the old fool could do to stop Danzo from force-feeding him skills and abilities that were too long out of reach of the village. His father's jutsu, among them. 00000. Uzumaki Naruto, I have been waiting to meet you for a long time. This was his tutor. Naruto questioned his faith in the old man. The guy that he had said would help him graduate was just a beat-up old man. He had a cut-up face and bandages all over his body. His right arm was in so many bandages it didn't even look like an arm. Sorry it took so long, G-sensei. Naruto's arm began its habitual rubbing of the back of his head. Holding in his sigh, Danzo corrected him. You will refer to me as Danzo-sama or simply sensei, and I was speaking about more time than just the wait for you to be delivered to the training grounds. I have wanted to meet you since before you entered into the academy. Oh, then why didn't you? The boy was blissfully unaware of his fate becoming slightly more painful each time he spoke. With a slight chuckle, Danzo introduced himself as the head of the Elder Council. Nodding for Shiho to explain what that was. And then stepping in to explain to the belligerent brat why he was the head instead of the Hokage. Blissfully unaware. While the Hokage was on the Elder Council, the point of having it was so he could get honest and open criticism about his managing the village, and if he were to be the head of the council, then giving them all an equal voice wouldn't work. They then discussed how they would operate. Danzo would evaluate him on the first day of each week, the day after his day of rest. Then the rest of the week would be spent attending classes and finishing the lessons that he left with Shiho. And on the day before his rest day he would be allowed to plan and perform a single mission. Shiho had already explained the details of his prank missions to him. Then he had one day in which he was forbidden from training in any way. If he had been caught during his mission, then this would be the day he spent paying for it. If not, then he would go to the bath house and a trusted masseur would give him a full spa treatment as reward for the successful mission. If he hadn't performed a mission, he was still allowed to go to the hot springs, it just wouldn't be covered.